Giving a Women of Courage award to a man on International Women's Day is, of course, appalling and disgusting to feminists, including myself.
I teach my elementary school students about gender identity. Some people are girls, some are boys, some are both, some are neither.
Men and women are the same, or that gender is a social construct instead of biologically driven.
I don't believe it's a woman's job to be emotionally stable. It's a woman's job to do many other very important things that men can't do. More important, they're better than men at a lot of things, women are.
These are weirdos getting creepy with other people's children.
Why is a group of people in New York walking around telling me what they're going to teach my kids and what my kids should believe? They're not your kids, they're my kids. And that's what's so scary, because children are impressionable and children are raised by the state and the internet, effectively.
Your duty, your moral duty, is to defend your children. This is an attack on your children, and you should fight back. With this much pressure being exerted on our society at all times, a lot of public figures just give up and become pathetic herd animals. But some of them become a lot more impressive, much deeper and more profound. And speaking of that, Tulsi Gabbard posted this video online today. We saw it. We thought you might want to also. Here it is.
Today's self-proclaimed feminists will not define what a woman is and are unfortunately actively seeking to erase the progress that Title IX has made over the last 50 years by essentially trying to erase women as an entire category of people.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's what's going on underneath the headlines. And so we wanted to ask Tulsi Gabbard more about it. She's a former member of Congress, of course, ran for president, and we're happy to have her tonight. Tulsi Gabbard, thank you so much for coming on. So
Thanks,
why did you say this? What was it in response to? And how long have you been thinking about this?
Well, this has been an ongoing issue, Tucker. As you know, I served in Congress for 8 years, and this has been something that's building and growing over time. I introduced legislation, bipartisan legislation, while I was in Congress out of a recognition of this problem, that we have people who claim to be feminists, yet who are exercising the height of hypocrisy by actually trying to erase women as an entire category of people, and doing so by doing things like the Biden administration is doing now in trying to undo Title IX, the legislation that was enacted 50 years ago, out of a recognition of the difference in biological sex between men and women and boys and girls. And so my legislation, very simply called the Protect Women's Sports Act, upheld that original intent of Title IX, ensuring that sports would be maintained with that original intent, with females competing against females, males competing against males. And so the video I posted this morning was part of a podcast interview that I did with one of the nation's top female swimmers, Riley Gaines, who has direct experience of the consequences of what this administration is doing, in that she was forced to compete against a biological male for the national championship, and how basically how she was sidelined in the interest of this fear-filled culture where you've just got to go along to get along, no matter the fact that you're actually denying the existence of objective truth, that you've got a 6'4" male with male parts competing and swimming against women in college and being given the podium and the medal while the women are being sidelined.
It really is a crashing defeat for what we were told feminism was. And I have to wonder, I mean, it's the opposite, as always, of what they claim it is. Do you have any sense of the motive behind this? Why would anyone want to do this?
It's a great question. The people who are propagating this, I'm sure they have their own motives that go actually much deeper than this issue of denying women, denying motherhood, trying to actually change our language so that we actually erase the word woman and mother and sister from our vocabulary. The underlying danger here is the denial of objective truth. And once we, as a society, allow this to occur, that we no longer believe that what is true, then what we're left with is no boundaries, no moral boundaries, and those in power being in a position where they and only they define and tell us what is true and what is false. And we end up with pure insanity.
Yes, they're God, in other words, and they define what reality is. That is so smart. So where are the defenders of women? You remember Gloria Steinem famously said, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. Now she's going to House hearings saying men can get pregnant. So Kara Dansky probably doesn't vote for the same people we vote for, but she's one of the only people we know who has persistently defended the right of women to exist, and we are grateful for that. She's president of the U.S. chapter of Women's Declaration International, author of the book The Abolition of Sex. She joins us tonight. Kara Dansky, thanks for coming on. And I'm sorry to make fun of it, because it is, of course, going to destroy civilization itself. But it is kind of amazing that all these self-aware, well-educated people are saying this stuff that actually is a huge middle finger in the face of women everywhere.
It is. It's horrible. Thanks so much for having me. Giving a Women of Courage award to a man on International Women's Day is, of course, appalling and disgusting to feminists, including myself, who fight for the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. And also, it's not more horrible than anything else that's gone on in terms of the erasure of women and girls throughout society. We are all expected to accept men who claim to be women, either simply by saying that they are, or by undergoing hormonal and/or surgical treatment to make themselves appear maybe slightly more like women, and we're all just supposed to accept it and go along. I do want to take quick issue with your assertion that feminism is dead. I am here to assure viewers feminism is not dead. But where I will agree with you is that mainstream feminist organizations that claim to be feminist, including organizations like Planned Parenthood and the National Organization for Women and the National Center for Lesbian Rights, have completely caved to what is, in effect, an industry-fueled men's rights movement. So I'll agree with you on that. But there are those of us on the political left who call ourselves radical feminists, and we will not stop fighting for women and girls.
Do you think the average person on any issue has no voice at all in this country, and that's, I think, becoming more true with the day. But do you think the average woman sees this as insulting? As a man, as who actually likes women, this seems like the most insulting possible thing I can imagine. Do you think it's perceived that way?
I do. And, you know, the other day I came across really interesting polling that suggested that people who consider themselves to be either very liberal or liberal, around 70 to 75% know that sex is real, know that sex doesn't change. So when you're referring to liberals going along with this, of course you're absolutely right that the Democratic Party is pushing this, and the sort of Democratic liberal elite is pushing this, but ordinary Americans across the political spectrum are not going along. And yes, I absolutely think that ordinary average American women see this as insulting. What they may not realize, though, is that it's no more insulting than the so-called trans movement has been to women and girls for years now.
I have had multiple students come out to me, not just with their sexuality, but also with their gender identity. It's one of the reasons I think it's so important to be out and loud and proud.
I teach my elementary school students about gender identity. Some people are girls, some are boys, some are both, some are neither.
I might tell this kid, we do have a flag in the class that you can pledge your allegiance to. And he looks around and he goes, oh, that one?
So again, if you were walking through the park with your kids and a stranger came up and started talking to them, say to your 5th grader, your 5-year-old, or even your 14-year-old, about sex, what would you do? Well, you would call the police, of course. That's not allowed. It's a crime because they're children. But teachers are allowed to do it and then to brag about it. And it's not stopping with classroom instruction. All over the country, adults are forcing children to attend drag shows. Watch. So just to be clear, as if it's not clear, and somehow we're in such a haze that it isn't clear to a lot of people, these are sexual fantasies playing out in public. And on one hand, we've all sort of agreed that's fine, go do your thing. But you are not allowed to bring children into your sexual fantasies because that's a species of child molestation. You can be fully clothed when it happens. It doesn't make it any less abusive or any less immoral. They're children. Keep children away from your sex life, comma, sicko. There was never any question about that. But now there is. And it's a bit of a tip-off that the same people conducting it are now trying to tell you that you can't use the word pedophile. Wonder why. Watch this.
Want to talk about minor attracted persons because they are probably the most vilified population of folks in our culture. You may have noticed that I'm using the term minor attracted persons, sometimes abbreviated to MAPS, instead of the more commonly used term pedophile.
MAP advocacy groups like Before You Act have advocated for use of the term MAP. They've advocated for it primarily because it's less stigmatizing than other terms like pedophile. A lot of people, when they hear the term pedophile, they automatically assume that it means a sex offender. And that isn't true, and it leads to a lot of misconceptions about attractions toward minors.
That last clip was from the Protesia Foundation, which you think federal law enforcement were taking a very close look at, and its donors. Child molestation is a crime for a reason. It destroys people. You can't use children as sexual objects. Now, the first woman you heard from, Alan Walker, worked at Old Dominion University in Virginia. She was fired after the video came out. But shortly after, Johns Hopkins hired her as a postdoc. So she got promoted. She was rewarded for making excuses for child molestation? And it's not just academics. You see book publishers aggressively trying to sexualize children. Have you taken a look at young adult books recently? Most are just stupid, some are flat out pornographic. In Fairfax, Virginia last year, a mother informed her school board that 2 books in the school's library, one called Genderqueer, another called Lawn Boy, written for 7th graders, contained material that you don't need to be a prude to think, wow, this is not, something's going on here. According to ABC News, the book Genderqueer, quote, contains explicit illustrations of oral sex and masturbation. The novel Lawn Boy contains graphic depictions of sex between men and children. So why are they pushing this on kids? Well, of course, to prime them for sexual exploitation. And anyone who said that's a puritanical take on this, you're being hysterical, get real. Get real. What's the point of pushing pornography on children except to sexualize them and take advantage of them? And they're telling us it's not really child molestation? By the way, everyone in charge seems to be fully behind this. Oh, it's so dark. And then, of course, there's the medical angle. At Boston Children's Hospital, they're cutting the breasts off of healthy children. According to a paper published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, Boston's Children's Hospital did, we're quoting, 177 gender-affirming double mastectomy surgeries in recent years. Roughly half of them were on girls, 15 to 18. Similar gender-affirming treatments, specifically chemical castration, were offered for many years in Britain. We're not the first to do this, at their infamous Tavistock Child Identity Clinic. Now, Britain's government just announced it is closing Tavistock. Why? Because they've been sued by more than 1,000 families who allege that, quote, children and young adolescents were rushed into treatment and therefore, quote, suffered life-changing and in some cases irreversible effects. They should have known that. The data have been out for a long time, but people with a sexual agenda, not a political agenda, a sexual agenda, have pushed so hard to make this legal and then fashionable that we've ignored it. But the numbers have been there. In 2011, researchers in Sweden released the results of a study that lasted 3 decades. That study found that people who underwent, quote, gender-affirming surgery were 19 times more likely to kill themselves than people who hadn't, the general population. So instead of covering all this, that's not a story, really? Sexualizing children, mutilating their genitals because you get off on it? Our media is not covering this at all. They're encouraging it, and they're hiding the reality behind euphemisms. They're referring to castration as, quote, gender-affirming care. Castration of children.
Gender-affirming mental and medical care for minors.
Often provide gender-affirming care to transgender people.
And gender-affirming care.
Seeking to ban gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth. efforts to restrict access to gender-affirming care.
Life-saving gender-affirming care for transgender people.
Life-saving gender-affirming care. Really, can you slow down a little bit and tell me what exactly that entails? Can you be a lot more specific? Can you bring pictures in? Show me what it looks like. Can you do that? What exactly are teachers talking to my kids about? What's a human sexuality lecture look like in my 6th graders class? Why don't you tell me? Speak slowly so I can take notes. The reality of all this, behind the euphemism, is horrifying. It's sexualizing children. And they go completely hysterical when you point that out because it's true. And the real question is, why is everyone else putting up with this? In a healthy country with an intact social fabric, neighborhood dads would mete out instant justice to anyone who even thought about sexualizing their kids. And if you doubt that, go ahead and try it in Bulgaria or South Africa or the Solomon Islands. Good luck. Let us know how that ends if you can still speak. People won't put up with it because the instinct to protect your children is the deepest of all human instincts, and it has to be. Of course, it has to be. But it's been all but eliminated in the West. Parents in this country and in Canada are far more passive. Why? Because they haven't recognized this phenomenon for what it is. They believe it's some kind of political movement, somehow related to the liberation struggle for trans rights, and therefore something you're not allowed to complain about or you're a bigot, and all the moms think you're bad. But it's not a liberation struggle. There is no liberation struggle. The battle for trans rights is long over. Trans people have rights. They can dress any way they like. And not only is that entirely legal, most Americans have no interest whatsoever in interfering with it at all. This is a fundamentally live and let live country, and it always has been. That's the deal we've always had. You do your thing, I'll do mine, and we'll both leave one another alone. And the overwhelming majority of the American population still favors that. Republican, Democrat, Independent, everybody's for that. But that's not what this is at all. These are not people who want to leave you alone or your kids alone. These are weirdos getting creepy with other people's children. That's exactly what it is. Say it. That's what it is. So why does no one ever ask that question if this liberation movement, which has been pretty transformative, I would say, of the country, is worth doing in the first place? You would think we'd know that women were happier. Are they happier?
They're not happier, and we had that study several years ago that came out and showed that women are decidedly less happy than men after, of course, this last 40 years of supposed so-called liberation. And that drumbeat, that constant drumbeat of feminism, feminist lies, which is what this article that I wrote was about, is absolutely having an enormous impact on our culture and on women, and specifically on their relationships with men and our ability to build happy families. Yeah, well, it's certainly noticeable. I don't think anything has changed our society more or for the worse. But to tell us specifically, as you do so capably in this piece, what some of the lies are. Okay, so the there's actually more than 4, to be honest with you, but those 4 that I named there were the ones that were the biggest ones that came to my mind, which is number 1, that women don't need men, and that's, of course, espoused left and right in all kinds of ways throughout the media. The second one is that men and women are the same, or that gender is a social construct instead of biologically driven. Yes. The third one is that there's no such thing as a biological clock, so we're not allowed to even talk about that because, God forbid, women have babies and get derailed on their careers, and we want them to be in the workforce, of course, full-time all the time, and if you step out and have babies, that's going to ruin the feminist agenda, so we don't like to talk about that. And then the fourth one is that a career is more meaningful than marriage and children. So those are the 4 that I focused on in that article. So what you're describing is a movement that is at war with nature, is at war with physical reality, with biology itself. What does that say? It sounds almost like a kind of delusion. This is not only happening, it is being celebrated and aggressively defended by virtually everyone with power. Take 3 steps back. We used to say, oh, our society doesn't care about children. That's not what this is. What you're seeing is a society that hates children. You would have to hate children in order to sexualize them, because sexualizing children screws them up for life. Ask anyone to whom it's happened. Period. No one should put up with this. No parent should put up with this for 1 second, no matter what the law says. Your duty, your moral duty, is to defend your children. This is an attack on your children, and you should fight back.
This is the level you can, but this is what the Matrix wants from you as a man. They want the woman in charge and the man below with no backbone, because if the woman's in charge, they can emotionally affect her. They can scare her. You can scare a woman easier than you can scare a man. A man. A real man's hard to scare. A woman you can make afraid of the vaccine, right? Be afraid, COVID, be scared. If she's in charge of the household, I would argue in nearly any household where the female was dominant, everyone's vaccinated. I would argue that point hard.
Of course.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I would argue it. I don't have the statistics. It's just logic to me. So, talk about women being unhappy. What's actually interesting about the female mind, once again, they're going to call me misogynist, is that when you're an emotionally led person, you're more prone to chaos. It takes real stoicism to lead. So why are these women unhappy? Because no one's leading them. No fathers, no men of no backbone, no man they respect. So they're relying on society, which is promoting chaos, and their own mental state. Women will say all the time, my period was coming up, so I was crazy. Like, they'll say that themselves. So without any kind of hard rock of emotional security, to give her a hug and say, don't worry, baby, calm down, it's okay. When you have no hard rock of emotional security and you leave her to her own devices, she's going to be to a degree chaotic. And you know who told me this? A woman said this to me. A woman said this to me. A woman said, most women are closer to a mental breakdown than you possibly believe, day by day. I was like, really? She goes, yeah, and that's what I love about my husband. He makes me feel happy and secure and safe. If I'm starting to have a problem, I know I go to him and he makes me feel safe. He's my rock. There's a woman said this to me a long time ago. Yes. So why are women miserable? Because where are they going to get their happiness from? Where are they going to get their emotional stability from? It's not their job. I don't believe it's a woman's job to be emotionally stable. It's a woman's job to do many other very important things that men can't do. More important. They're better than men at a lot of things, women are. But it's our job to be emotionally stable. Women are better than us at certain things. We're better at other things. And that's why as a team we're so powerful. To sit and pretend we're all the same the whole way through, then why do we even need each other anymore?
Well, I don't think we do.
You're exactly it. And this is why we have birth rates declining, porn, women who are running around sharing one man with no intention of having children, marriage is gone. Like, where do we think this is going to end? And what's interesting about
it ends with the training thing, right?
Well, yeah, that's the ultimate.
No, I'm serious though. Is it? I mean, if there's no, scrambling the idea of the gender binary of sex differences, like that is kind of the end point, isn't it?
Well, the end point is, men are the same as women, so it doesn't even matter.
Right.
I can be a woman today, be a man tomorrow. None of it matters anymore. I also think a large part of this transsexual movement, I think a large part of it is a deliberate attack on us and our senses because they're trying to convince us to ignore our eyes. I do believe that is a bottom line. I think the bottom line of slavery are your own senses. Like, no matter what I'm told that it's cold outside, I feel warm. That's the bottom line. So once they can convince you that your senses are wrong, well, then you're completely open for the slave program. True. Once you can look at something with your eyes and ignore your eyes, you're a prime candidate. So I think a lot of this has also something to do with that. You are gonna say that's a girl. That's what you are going to say because you have to. And if you say it long enough, you'll think it. And if you won't, your children will because we'll tell them. So eventually, you're gonna say it. And then it becomes true. Then you ignore your eyes. Now you'll believe anything, right? Till the next thing comes along. Now you'll believe all the people on the jets telling you about climate change. It's all an attack on the senses.
This is America's most famous admiral.
You know, it's such an important issue for our youth and adults. As you said, some of these laws are actually extending into adulthood. You know, we often say that gender-affirming care is health care, gender-affirming care is mental health care, and gender-affirming care is literally suicide prevention care. Would that be your view as well?
I 100% agree.
It's genuinely, I want to actually genuinely give my heartfelt condolences to any young person who falls for this crap, because you're going to be so miserable for the rest of your life. If you chop off your genitals and take a whole bunch of chemicals as a teenager, you are going to be miserable for the rest of your life.
Yes.
You're never going to be the person you want to be. You're never going to be accepted as that person. You're never going to feel happy inside. If you fall for this, I genuinely feel sorry for you too. That's the first thing I'm going to say. The second thing I'm going to say, I find it very interesting that the only surgery we call affirming is gender surgery. Imagine a girl woke up and said, I was born in the wrong body because my tits are small. I'm a big-titted woman, but I was born in the wrong body. I need tit-affirming care. I need to affirm my true body shape. Otherwise, I have a mental health problem. No, it's plastic. It looks good, perhaps, whatever. But we would never say she was born in the wrong body and we had to affirm her genuine body experience.
Her triple Ds.
Yeah, her triple Ds had to be affirmed. It's garbage. You're not affirming anything. And also, I think it's kind of interesting. They say that trans people commit suicide at a higher rate. That's sad. Nobody should kill themselves. I would hate for anybody to kill themselves. They say that's because they're picked on for being trans. I don't know why anyone's ever had the argument that perhaps they have a mental instability before this trans stuff, and that's why they're more prone to suicide in the first place.
Seems like an obvious explanation.
Seems like an obvious explanation. I don't think it's normal for anybody to want to mutilate themselves. I think if someone were to come to me and say, I really want to cut my hand off, I would think they had a mental illness. Why? Don't like it. What do you mean you don't like it? I don't like my hand. I don't want it. I would think that's very concerning. So I really, truly feel sorry for any young people who fall for this. I don't blame them. I think it's a massive psyop. And I think if you fall for it, you're going to be miserable forever. And one more point I'll make on this whole thing I found very interesting. I'm a professional fighter, so I spent a lot of time in Thailand when I was fighting. Kickboxing's big over there. And I've always thought, no one's ever mentioned that Thailand has a bunch of ladyboys, right? But if you say to a ladyboy, are you a man or a woman? She goes, I'm a ladyboy. What's that? I'm a man, but I'm a ladyboy. They don't see themselves as women in the real sense of I am female. Right. They don't want to compete against women in sports. They don't want to pretend they can have kids. They don't talk about having periods. They're like, oh, I'm a ladyboy. It's like kind of like an in-between, it's got its own thing.
India has the same.
Yeah, it's fine. Nobody over there is genuinely arguing that they are actually female. Only in America are we doing that. And that's what's the craziest thing of all. Even if you truly, truly believe you need to change gender, and you truly believe it's the right path for you, and you believe you're not being psyoped, and you believe you're going to be happy, and you believe you need to mutilate yourself, that's all fine. But then to come along with the hubris and arrogance to tell me that I have to pretend you're something you're not, biologically.
That's right.
That's absolutely not really arrogant. You can't tell me what I have to call you, right? I'm allowed to come to my own conclusions and opinions. And the whole point of being a human is that we've gone through life long enough to identify patterns. Imagine humans didn't identify patterns. One person went and got ate by the lion, you watch it happen, then you go for a turn. Like, no, you work out over time. Don't go near the lion, right? If I look at a person who's 6'4", muscularly built, right, with a big jaw and a beard, my brain and my life experience tells me that's quite often a man. That's
very often it is.
Very often. That's the conclusion I've come to. To come along and say, no, because I've decided to do X, Y, Z, you have to ignore all of the patterns you've identified throughout your entire life and everything you believe to be true. You have to throw away all the science and your entire worldview and everything about how you view the world. You have to eject that from your brain and call me what I want to be called is extremely arrogant. And if I went through the world and said everyone had to call me King Andrew, they'd tell me, shut up. Why? If they can get called whatever they want, I should be able to get called whatever I want. I want to be King Andrew, #1 savior of Earth, climate change activist. That's what I want to be. And if anybody calls me anything else, they're a bigot. That's what we're going to do. If we're going to go down that path, I'm going to make sure that my title is good. Lord of all beasts of the land and fishes in the sea. The most honorable man who's ever lived. The fastest human alive. Who cares? Doesn't matter that I can't run fastest. It doesn't matter, Tucker. I'm the fastest human alive. You must affirm my belief. I'm the fastest man alive. Greatest man in show business. Sorry, Tucker. Best political commentator there's ever been. Let's just go down this path of insanity. Why not? Walk around with stickers on our head. It'd be great. It'd be fun. The scariest thing about all this stuff is that the world is still polarized to a degree because there's certain places in the world which are too close to baseline reality for survival, for any of this garbage to fly. You think you can go to Tajikistan where people are trying to eat and talk to them about gender and all this garbage? They'll be like, listen, you're a man, this needs doing. Shut up, right? There's no time for any of that. So as the Western world is self-destructing in real time, there are places in the world where none of this crap is happening. So who's going to own the world in 100, 200 years? Like, it's still competitive to a degree. It's still bipolar. There's two sides to the world. I think that when men are men and women are women and we stop arguing about dumb shit, that society overall is more competitive. I don't know how America's going to maintain its influence over the entire planet when it's doing all this garbage. How long can this possibly last?
Not long.
Not long. It's like the fall of Rome. The fall of Rome, everything became decadent, endless sex and orgies. No one had enough faith in the state to join the army anymore. And people talk about barbarians destroying Rome. Rome was destroyed from the inside. That's what happens. And we're witnessing it in real time. And we have all these problems on Earth, and then they want to spend millions and millions of dollars on an investigation to prove that I'm a human trafficker for TikTok. It's clown world. Nothing even makes sense anymore.
This is a video from a recent Pride March in New York. I'm interested in your view of it.
So I have a few points on this. The first point is that it is an unfortunate reality, and I'm not going to be called a bigot. I'm going to talk about the reality that the homosexual community cannot reproduce in and of themselves. So for them to have a community into the future, they do need your children. That's how they think. For there to be a homosexual community in 100 years from now, they need straight people's kids, because only straight people have children. So they're telling the truth. That's the first thing. They mean what they say. The second thing is, I think a lot of this is an attention grab by them. I think they are slightly disappointed in how tolerant many people actually are. I have no problem with gay people, I don't care. I'm gay, cool. I want to get married, fine. I'm gonna wave my dick in your kid's face. Wait a second.
Yeah.
They push it to a point where we have to react. And then when we react, they say we're bigoted. Children are innocent, and destruction of innocence is one of the most disgusting things on the face of the planet. It's terrible if a child is killed in a war. It's terrible if a child's mind is warped by any propaganda mechanism. They're innocent. What I don't understand is why, imagine heterosexual men walked around naked saying we're coming for the children.
Well, someone gets shot.
Absolutely. So why is it when
for
you
good reason.
Completely. So as soon as there's this sexual orientation, they're completely protected. And I think that the whole point of having children as a whole is to instill them with your worldview. I know if I have children, I want them to be like me. We just talked about my last name and how I want them to honor me into post-death. Then I want them to be a representation of me, which means they should believe in my values and my creeds. Why is a group of people in New York walking around telling me what they're going to teach my kids and what my kids should believe? They're not your kids, they're my kids. And that's what's so scary, because children are impressionable and children are raised by the state and the internet, effectively.